Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for 5 Keys to Enrolling in a Crowded Online Market. Julie Delich, our Senior Director of Enrollment here at Learning House, will be leading this webinar. Julie was a former Director of Enrollment at the University of Phoenix, so we are awfully glad she's here with us. And in the last year, her team enrolled more than 2,300 students, so she definitely knows what she's doing. A few housekeeping issues. We welcome questions. We want you all to participate and ask questions. We do ask that you type your questions into the chat, and then we will read your questions aloud and answer them that way. Also, please make sure your phone is on mute, just so that we don't get any background noise or anything like that. And with that, Julie, take it away.
All right, wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This presentation is definitely going to have some tactics and strategy kind of worked in together so that hopefully you can walk away from this presentation with some real tangible concepts that you can take back to your own departments. So before we dive in, though, to those tactics, just to sort of review kind of the state of online higher education, so we're all kind of looking at the same information. I'm sure all of us have felt this trend very intimately over the past several years. There's definitely been a year-over-year trend of declining enrollment across the board, whether we're looking at for-profit or not-for-profit, private or public, just a general trend of decline in enrollment numbers for higher education. So certainly lends itself to the competitive nature of our marketplace. In addition to that, the supply is increasing as our demand is decreasing. So there's an increase in the number of higher educational institutions who are offering degrees and programs for people. So that combination makes it increasingly competitive and challenging for all of us to meet our goals and to service our students. So let's then dive into looking at kind of the demographics of today's online student. When we're looking overall, 62% of our population is female. Our median age is hovering right around about 35 years old, and a median income of $55,000. So looking at those demographics, that type of online student really has particular concerns that are unique to them and not necessarily applicable to the traditional students that many of us have been accustomed to. So what are the questions on the mind of this student? In today's online world, these students want to know, how much is it going to cost me to complete these the program of choice that I'm looking at? They're also interested in speed. How fast can I complete this program? Because students in this group have other obligations that are pulling them away. They're not solely focused on their educational pursuits. They often have community obligations, job obligations, family obligations. So speed to completion is critical for them to continue to sustain their life. And then finally, that last question fits exactly in with my last point. Really, how can I fit education into my lifestyle without harming all those other commitments that I've already made and that are really a priority for me in my life? So I think we can agree that it's a crowded market. Certainly looking at the data and looking at the student population that we're talking about for online students in particular, it's crowded out there. So the 5 keys that we're going to go over in a moment really come to these 2 key points. We need to be providing standout service to these students to differentiate ourselves. And we also need to really be looking at these students as unique individuals, assessing their needs one by one, and exceeding what expectations they bring to our institutions. So that's kind of the basis for what these 5 keys evolved from. Okay, so here they are, the 5 keys. As I mentioned, you want to make sure that you are providing exceptional student-focused service. The 5 ways to do that: make sure that you have an incredible speed to contact. We'll talk about these in detail in a moment. Make sure that you're offering unofficial evaluations for the transfer credits, speaking to that speed to completion. Assist with collecting transcripts. As I mentioned with that student focus, assess students' motivation and make sure they're a good fit. And then finally, providing some support when it comes to tuition planning and answering that how much will it cost me question. So let's take a deeper dive into each of these keys and talk about them in more depth. And here again, I'm going to get tactical with you. So we're looking at step one, key one, having effective contact agents to really have that speed to contact. One of my mentors, his favorite saying is, "He who bonds first wins." And my little spin-off of that is it's all about relationships. So really making sure that when a student requests information about your institution, it is an easy process. It takes a couple seconds for them to fill out some kind of web form or some way to call in and make a request for help. That needs to be very simple, very accessible. Then that's where the role of the contact agent takes over. And to fill everybody in on what I mean by a contact agent, this is a specific individual or group of individuals at your institution that their main role is to make contact with students asking for information about your institution. That is it. That is their full focus. You can certainly utilize student workers, graduate assistants, or hire individuals on a full-time basis that are full-time staff with you. These contact agents, you want to make sure you have a very clear parameter for them to operate within, a standard operating procedure, for example, and provide them with consistent training on their process and their scripting. For the contact agents that work with us here at the Learning House, our goal is to make at least the very first attempt to contact within 15 minutes of that student's request for help. So we'll send out an initial email and deliver a phone call within 15 is the maximum. We really try to do it faster than that, but that's the expectation that we have set so that the students know that we are there and that we heard their request for information and their request for help. So with a lot of our partner institutions, we've had some interesting discussions about the difference between stalking a student versus supporting a student. And you want to be mindful of this. You don't want to come across as a stalker and inundate them with numerous phone calls and emails simultaneously and really turn the student away because of an overzealous approach. So what we have found to be a positive branding exercise is to make 8 attempts to contact within 10 days of the initial request, or my personal preference is 10 attempts to contact within the first 13 days of the request for information. I prefer the 10 and 13. It's staggered between 5 emails and 5 phone calls on an alternating basis. And just to give you some data points to work with, utilizing the 10 and 13 strategy, the contact rates for our partner institutions hover right around 77% of our leads are contacted. So we find this strategy to be very, very productive in reaching students that are looking for information. We also keep a very close eye on these contact rates, which is critical for success here in this first key of providing timely feedback to your students. Monitor your contact rates on a 3-day basis, 10, 30, and 90-day basis, meaning you want to make sure you're looking at, of the leads we've taken in the last 3 days, what percentage of them have we made some kind of contact with. Now, contact can be defined as positive, negative, or neutral. You might have a positive contact, meaning that the student is interested, you have made voice-to-voice or email contact, and they want to know more. Neutral contact would be an email response saying thank you. It's not good or bad, it just is some kind of connection with the student, and you know that they are at least interested enough to reply. And then, of course, there's the negative contact where someone will say, I've changed my mind, please don't contact me, I'm no longer interested. In any of those 3 options, at least the student knows that your institution is committed to helping them. You've given them a positive experience from a customer service perspective, that you've responded to their request. So that summarizes key 1. I do also want to mention, please feel free to ask questions within the chat box as I go along. And as I see them pop up, we can go ahead and address them throughout our conversation today, or I can catch some of them as we move forward. So please don't hold back if you have a question, going ahead and submitting that in the chat box. But I'm going to go ahead and dive right into key 2. And here it's the concept of making sure that you offer students the option to have their transfer credits evaluated. Again, going back to the core needs of our students, they want to know how much is it going to cost me and how fast can I complete your program. So it's really important that we are providing students with this opportunity often and early in the process, preferably asking or offering this service even before they apply. That is really, really important. So many institutions currently will wait till a student has applied and deposited funds towards their education before they'll evaluate transfer credits. There's an interesting article that the Chronicle put out that I've referenced here on this very topic, that a lot of students almost feel like that's a bait and switch kind of approach, and we really want to provide them with a sense that they are valued, that they're important to our institutions, and that we are going to help them make a responsible decision about their educational pursuits by providing them with that information up front and not making them invest non-refundable monies prior to that decision. So I did notice a question popped up from the previous slide, so let me take a moment, pause here. Do the emails vary across those 5 days, going back to the previous slide where we were talking about the contact agents? Lisa, thank you. That's an excellent question. Yes, those emails do vary slightly across the 5 days. The first email is much more informative. We got your request. Here is some information and some resources for you. Here's who you would want to contact for more information. And then they change throughout the 5, becoming more progressive towards the 5th one, which is more a final call to action. We haven't heard from you. We've had trouble reaching you. Please let us know what the best method of communication is. So they do change across there. Let me take a peek here at a couple more questions before I continue forward.
Joshua has a question.
All right, Joshua, you're asking if the leads being purchased have a very low contact rate, is it likely the lead vendor? Oh, absolutely. You would want to look at your lead sources and their contact rates individually, as well as your overall speed to contact. So if your overall speed to contact is 3 days or 5 days, but you have a particular lead vendor that is showing a 90-day contact is when you really are finally able to get in touch, then you really want to look at, is that a vendor that you want to be continuing to work with if your process is the same across the board. So yes, I would very much dig into your lead sources when you're looking at your contact rates. So great question there.
We have a question from Angela asking, do you have specific subject lines that have delivered better open results?
Yes, actually, that's a great question. The initial subject line, typically we just utilize our institution's name. So follow up from insert name here. But as we move towards the final 5th email, we've noticed that subject lines that have either the program listed, the student's name listed, or some kind of call to action are the ones we tend to get the best response from. So the student's name probably by far has been our biggest response rate, but also the program really seems to attract students to that email because it's, again, personalized. It reaches out to them specifically.
Okay. Abe asks, do you have any data on increases in conversion from using a QT approach for first contact versus a full admissions rep, advisor, et cetera?
I would have to dig a little bit to find some pretty old data on that. We've been using the contact agents approach for quite some time. I could speak to some of our partner institutions prior to partnering with us had contact rates probably in the 30s and 40s, and then once we came on board, moved that to the 70 70th percentile. But that's probably the best quote I can give you without digging in for more specifics. Good question.
And then is there an industry average that students expect, a percentage, some kind of baseline that people can be using to measure their results?
You know, there's so much debate about industry standard because of the disparity between a public and a private, a for-profit and a not-for-profit. So you'll find different numbers across the board. My personal goal for our partner institutions is a 72% lead to contact rate. That's what we strive for as our industry standard internally. Another good question.
Okay, we've got some more questions, and then, let's take these questions and then move on, and if more questions at the end.
Sounds great.
Okay, so is this are we talking about undergraduate or graduate students or both?
Both.
Okay.
This strategy works for both.
Do you recommend the same kind of rapid communication for more traditional students in a longer sales cycle?
You know, my background is non-traditional adult learners. So it would certainly be something you'd want to evaluate. Since it is a much longer sales cycle for traditional undergraduate students, you want to be cautious that you are not over-contacting. So I would really take a step back from that and probably experiment a little bit, because I think the sense of stalker-ishness, I'm going to create a word for you, would be higher with a traditional student with this strategy, whereas adult learners expect this level of service. So yeah, I would definitely change it up for the longer sales cycle.
Okay, and then you mentioned having the initial contact within 15 minutes, but what about outside of normal office hours?
If you can set up an automated email, that's ideal. So best case scenario is you have a system that when a student requests information, an automated email goes out. If you can't, then what you would want to do is outside of normal office hours, the minute you get back into the office, go back through and catch up on, say, the weekend leads that had come in. That is still a reasonable strategy. Most adult learners recognize that people are out of the office during the weekends and late at night. So typically, we haven't really had a lot of complaints about that.
Okay, so I know that there are more questions out there. You all are a very engaged group, which is fantastic. But we are going to move on to the next slide, and we will circle back around and answer all of these at the end.
Wonderful. So let's jump back into our discussion about the importance of transcript evaluations, transfer credit evaluations. In the best case scenario, work with students and utilize unofficial transcripts to provide them with some level of knowledge. And you can be very clear with these learners that this is an unofficial evaluation because they are providing you with unofficial documents. So that is a really realistic conversation that you can have. It's very important to make these kinds of evaluations simple, but yet informative to the student. So simple in the respect that you can give the student a sense of, it looks like you have this many transfer credits that are eligible, this many transfer credits that will apply, and this many remaining credits in gen eds, and this many remaining in your major. So you do want to have some level of detail, but not overwhelm them with maybe a full degree plan. It is really important, though, that you add that disclaimer of an unofficial evaluation, because if there's any changes to the transcripts once the official comes in, we want to make sure the student knows that that would change the evaluation of their credits. So on this next slide, I have a sample disclaimer for you that can be utilized just to sort of give us something to work off of. So here you're basically letting the student know that we have to not only evaluate the credits, we'll need to evaluate the institution the credits came from. That gives the maximum number of possible transfer credits, so that would vary by your institution. It also speaks to the grade requirement, so for this particular disclaimer we chose C- or better, and also included the fact that only 8 semester hours could come into their major throughout their program. And again, reiterating at the bottom, it's an estimate and only official once things are verified and recorded by the Office of the Registrar. So here is, again, just a sample for you to work with when you're thinking about providing the unofficial evaluation of transfer credits to this type of learner. So speaking of transcripts, this may seem very trivial and small to most of us who are familiar with academia and know how simple it can be to request a transcript. However, most adult learners in the online demographic are coming to us with 3 to 4 previous institutions that they have attended. The idea of gathering transcripts from all of these schools can seem like a large perceived obstacle. Even though to us it might seem so simple and something that we could easily walk students through, it can really become an easy excuse for students to utilize to not move forward with the process. Here again, what the recommendation would be for Key 3 is to have your students sign a form with information about their previously attended institutions and sign off on allowing your institution to pay for and collect those previous transcripts on behalf of the student. The other wonderful part of doing this service for your students is that when a transcript is delayed more than 2 weeks, you'll know, and you'll have the ability to reach out to that registrar's office and find out what status is and follow up so that that student's transcripts can be received in a timely fashion, or if there's a hold, which in many cases there can be, you can then follow up back with your applicant, letting them know that there's a hold from that institution that they need to resolve before they can move forward with you. This is a tremendous strategy for moving students from an applied status to an accepted status with your institution. And many times when we're looking at decline rates, we're talking about students that aren't qualified. But here what we're saving are the students that are qualified but often self-select out of your funnel because they've run into an obstacle that feels insurmountable. So something as simple as assisting them with transcript collection can be groundbreaking for helping students stay with you. And it also gives them that sense that your institution cares about them as a unique individual, that you're investing in them even before they've started with you. And that does such beautiful things for your brand and probably relates back to your mission statements. I've looked at some of the registrants to this webinar, and most of you, and all of you in fact, come from schools with beautiful mission statements that really are about helping and educating. And this speaks to your willingness to do that and the importance you place on your student population. So I'll come up for air for a second and see if we have some questions here.
Emily wants to know if we have a sample form for students to complete for the official transcripts to be requested on their behalf.
Emily, if you want to reach out to me privately, I will follow up with you on that. I can certainly provide you with a document. It's very simple. My document that I use for our partner schools has 3 boxes on it that the student can fill out: the name of their previous institution, the address of the institution, their name on file when they were attending that institution or any previous names that they had, the dates that they attended. And then at the bottom, or on each of those boxes, there's a place for the student to do a physical signature, giving us permission to collect the documents. And I'll tell you right now, everyone, that's key. It needs to be a pen-to-paper physical signature. Many, many registrar's offices will not accept electronic signatures. That wet signature, as we refer to it, is critical to helping you make this process work for your students. So, but feel free to reach out to me privately, and I'll send that over your way. And my information will be at the very end of the webinar with my email address. Any other questions for me to address at the moment, or are we good to?
No, but I do want to let people know, because this is a ton of information, that we will be emailing the slides out, and a recording will be available on the Learning House website in about a week. So if you feel like you want to revisit or have other members of your team listen, you will be able to do that.
Wonderful. All right, so let's jump then into key number 4 in our competitive place. Here is where your admissions staff really become critical elements to assisting students through your enrollment funnel or your enrollment process. It is so important that when they are talking to students, they are matching the student's motivation with what your institution offers. asking questions about why are you coming back to school? I see you've attended 3 or 4 other schools. What stopped you before and what's going to keep you in now? One of the things that we really talk about in the enrollment team here at Learning House is a philosophy of enrolling to retain. It is so important that the students know that this is a challenging environment they're about to offer. It's it's academically rigorous. It is not going to be easy. It is convenient because it's online, but it is not easy. So their motivation needs to be top of mind in order to be successful in our institutions. So we want to also make sure that we are appropriately directing students that their ultimate goals match the programs that we're offering. So we really want to dig in. What are your career aspirations? What are your educational goals? Why? Why is this important to you? And then this is the place to be proactive about barriers. Talk to me about what's gotten in your way in the past. Talk to me about what you're going to do about that in the future, and really strategize to say, okay, so you've had trouble with time management. That is a critical barrier that we need to help you overcome so you can be successful in our online program. So having this kind of customized conversation that is motivationally driven is really important to differentiate your school from every other online program, because here again, it shows your commitment to these individuals, these potential students. It shows that you value them as unique people and are interested in their future success right from day one. So this is a real critical piece. Like, I kind of can't emphasize this one enough, that assessing motivation and enrolling to retain is so important to make sure that your programs are successful and that your brand stays strong so that students are entering your program completely prepared and ready to go. So that is key number 4. I'll go over key 5 and then we'll check in on some questions. So key 5, one of the things that we noticed in the last several years was the main reason that students were self-selecting out of our enrollment funnel was a fear of finances, something related to how were they going to pay for school, or a confusion regarding federal financial aid if that was their selected payment option. But this was becoming a continually increasing reason or mantra that we were hearing from students. So what we instituted was a liaison position that we labeled tuition planner. And the tuition planner is the bridge between our admissions team and our financial aid team. So many times, students are afraid and they just need very basic answers to questions. And our financial aid teams have so much work to do with packaging and resolving C codes and all of the other wonderful things that they take care of that pull them away from a student focus. So the tuition planner is the boots on the ground person that understands financial aid at a deeper level, but is really focused on answering very basic questions about what is a FAFSA, how do I get there, what are some other payment options if I don't want to take out loans. The other piece of the puzzle that our tuition planners have really been a tremendous asset with is talking people off the ledge when they are selected for verification. When a student is selected for verification and they're an adult learner, which is our online population that we discussed earlier, many times we've heard feedback that they actually think they're being audited, or they think they did something wrong and they are frightened by the verification letter or email that comes their way, and they simply stop answering phone calls. So this person, the tuition planner, acts as the voice of reason to normalize verification and to assist students with where to obtain the appropriate paperwork, where to submit the appropriate paperwork, and any other kinds of challenges that they might be facing related to verification. Most of the time, it really is just that human touch that makes the difference. Money is a sensitive topic, and students want their questions answered immediately. So I do have one example here. I know earlier we had a question about the data and how some of these keys affect the data. With one of our partner schools, we instituted this tuition planner role, and within 3 months of that rollout, their accepted to start conversion went from 34% to 71%. And this school has rolling starts, so we were able to see change very quickly. If you have less starts per year, this conversion will take longer for you to show improvement. But with rolling entry points, it makes it a lot easier to collect data quickly. So that's a dramatic jump. And it really showed to us the importance of having someone to be available to answer questions and explain these kinds of concepts to students in a very timely fashion, and really be that, like I said before, voice of reason to make sure that it's normalized and not a frightening endeavor that the students are experiencing. So let's pause here and answer some questions, Emily.
Okay. So for institutions with a big international population, collecting transcripts can be prohibitive because of cost.
Absolutely.
So do you have any recommendations or suggestions?
Yeah, that's a tough one. The institutions that I partner with don't collect international transcripts because of that complexity, and that does get pushed back to the students being responsible to collect that information or have a wet eval or whatever is required by your university. If you have a large population that is internationally based, you may want to consider having an individual who is a expert in that area and really works with those students one-on-one. If you can't collect them for them, at least you can talk them through the process, so providing them with a higher level of support. So that would be my suggestion there. That's a tough one.
These are two related questions. The first is, how many slots should be allotted for listing previous schools?
Mm-hmm.
And then, do you recommend limiting the number of transcripts previous schools in an effort to reduce cost, avoid students with less likelihood of succeeding, and maybe avoid financial aid fraud?
Okay, good question. So the form that we utilize has 3 slots per page because that was really a spacing issue. That was how many we could fit on one page, and the average student has 3 to 4 transcripts in our experience with the population that we're working with. We've made the form a form that the students can retrieve online and print as many copies as they need. So the 3 slots is really not limiting to the student, but in most cases the 3 is sufficient. There was a second part to that question regarding should you put limitations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a proponent of accessibility. So from my opinion, no, you should not put a limit on the number of previous transcripts, but it would be a red flag that you would want to be mindful of if you had someone come in with an excessive number of previous transcripts, and then in that assessing motivation in part of Key 4, you would really want to dig in and make sure that that student is now prepared. Find out what changed. You know, every student has a story, and there might be a really valid reason that they were hopping colleges previously and have now settled down, grown up, whatever the case may be. But I would definitely take that as something to really keep an eye on as a red flag.
What is the average cost per student for the transcript ordering?
I think we're hovering right around $5 to $7 because some are free. So it really offsets your needs. You need to assess that, though, for your population. Most online students are coming to a university within 50 to 100 miles of their home. So you'll very quickly ascertain particular universities that you're collecting transcripts from more frequently than others. So, for example, there might be a community college nearby you where you are constantly requesting transcripts. You might be able to work out some kind of relationship, perhaps a break in fees, with that particular university, since you might have a relationship with them. You could even build that into an articulation agreement, for example. But right now we're hovering in that 5 to 7 range for most of our partners.
Well, how do you resource transcript collection? Do the admissions officers submit transcript requests for applicants?
Great question. At Learning House, we have a team of transcript collectors. So that is their role. The enrollment counselor will collect the form and then pass the form to the transcript team. And then that team, their sole purpose is to actually go out and collect the transcripts, follow up on late requests, things of that nature. That would be my suggestion. You might even be able to utilize some student workers, graduate assistants, people of that nature to help you with the transcript collection process, because it is something that is rather standardized that you would be able to teach very quickly.
So we now have some questions about tuition planning.
Okay, great.
Manny wonders if you did a preliminary student self-evaluation as a quick unofficial degree audit, you are empowering the student candidate and getting them involved in their own success. And also, have you had any success in utilizing video chat?
You know, we haven't really dabbled in video chat as of yet, Manny, but I think that is a great suggestion because it really goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of this presentation with personalizing your approach and treating the students as unique individuals. So certainly I wish you all the best if that's the direction you take it, and I'd actually love to hear from you what kind of success you have if you do that.
What office is the tuition planner a part of? Is it enrollment or financial aid?
It's its own entity, but it operates under Enrollment's umbrella. But they are absolutely a liaison. So we have usually weekly or bi-weekly meetings with the enrollment team, the tuition planners, and the financial aid team to make sure that we're all staying current and any changes are being updated frequently. But the way I have it structured for Learning House, it is its own entity but under the umbrella of Enrollment.
When is the time frame for when the tuition planner would contact the student? How soon after the applications are approved and how close to their start date?
Great question. So the tuition planners will speak to students at any stage of the process, but they begin an active outreach once the student has applied. So once the student has actually applied to our schools, that's when our tuition planners begin to reach out. The real kind of urgency picks up if we haven't talked to that student in tuition planning and they are accepted. At that point, it becomes very important that we make sure that the student is aware that tuition planning is something that they have access to. We have noticed that a lot of our graduate students do not need as much support from the tuition planners and in some cases opt out completely, which makes complete sense. If they're using financial aid and they've done it before, they really might not need that level of support. We still offer it, but the graduate students don't quite take advantage of it as frequently.
When collecting transcripts for students, does the institution absorb those fees, or do you suggest adding it on to the student's first-year tuition?
Yeah, that's a great budgeting question. You can really structure that however you would choose. As a partnership agency, a vendor, we absorb that cost for our partner institutions. But for your own purposes, definitely speak to your CFO and really think about where you would want to place that or offset that cost, whether it's in an application fee, whether it's in your first-year tuition, which is actually what I would recommend. But yeah, that's totally up to the way you're structured at your institution.
Do you think these strategies are as important with hybrid blended courses?
Yes, absolutely. I think blended learners still tend to be in this adult learner grouping. Their demographics are still very similar at most institutions. And certainly, use your own sense of judgment here. If your demographics in your hybrid programs are more similar to your traditional students, then you'd want to rely on strategies that were more useful and beneficial there. But if, in my experience, the demographic is very similar across online and hybrid learners, so then I would stick to these strategies.
Leslie has a great question. Does Learning House collect the official transcripts and then forward them on to the school? And if so, does that cause any pushback about whether the transcripts you've received are truly official?
That's a wonderful question, and we do often have very lengthy discussions with our partners on this topic. We do, at Learning House, collect the official transcripts and we stamp them as official. We have folks that are trained to evaluate whether it is truly an official or not official transcript. And then we physically mail those transcripts to the university. We also scan the transcripts and send them to the university in an electronic format so that they have immediate accessibility if the school wants that, which most of our partners do.
What is the difference between a contact agent and an enrollment counselor? At what point does the agent transfer to a counselor?
Great question. So the contact agent is typically in our structure has a high school diploma and is focused solely on contact. So that's their qualifications and that's their job. Then the second any kind of contact is made, positive, neutral, doesn't matter, that's when the transfer to the enrollment counselor happens. So in the perfect world, we get a student on the phone and they are available to talk right now. So the contact agent will do a live phone transfer to the enrollment counselor, and that relationship can begin to build between the enrollment counselor and the student. In many cases, the student's not available to talk right now, or they send us an email, and in those situations, the contact agent will simply forward the information to the enrollment counselor, who at that point will pick up with the student and continue to assist moving forward. Great question.
Do you think having an application fee is important? And if so, is it as important for graduate as well as undergraduate programs?
You're asking for my opinion, so I'm going to give it. I am anti-application fee. I think it is a barrier, and like I said a few moments ago, I'm very pro-accessibility. So I think it's really important to stay relevant in today's world, and if there is a barrier that's going to stop a student from looking at one of our partner schools, I want to get rid of it. So I think that it's much more important to make sure that your tuition is competitive and allows you to be sustainable, and to eliminate any initial barriers that might turn a student away from your institution. It makes me sad to think that a student might move away from a wonderful university like you're representing because they can't afford a $35 or a $50 application fee, and that they're making those kinds of decisions, because unfortunately in today's world, there are folks that would be a deal breaker. And so removing that barrier is critical to allow them to make you a viable option. So that's my personal opinion.
Have tuition planners helped down the road in reducing AR or unpaid balances?
You know, it's a relatively new position. I suspect the answer is yes, Angela, but I don't have data to prove it just yet. Over time, I think we will see that to pan out. What we have noticed is that the verification resolution rates have increased, so that students do not then end up having to either drop out or owe a balance to our universities. So we've seen that effect, but I suspect that down the road we will see it impacting our bottom line overall. Any other questions so far? Okay, let's see. We have a question here that says, is the counselor employed by you or your partner, or does it depend per partner agreement? Oh, great question. The contact agents, enrollment counselors, and tuition planners and transcript processors are employed by the Learning House. Now, not every partner at the Learning House utilizes our enrollment services, but the ones that do, all of those folks are employed by the Learning House. The financial aid department and the people that make the acceptance decisions at the admissions staff are employed by the institution, by our partner. Great question.
Have you seen that there is an over-contact risk when contact agents, enrollment team members, and tuition planners are contacting the student simultaneously, or have you seen the risk in relationship building when switching between the three?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Charles. We are very mindful of really working as a team with these individual students. So there's not really an issue between the contact agent and the enrollment counselor, because there's a distinct line of demarcation from when it becomes the contact agent's responsibility to reach out and the enrollment counselor's responsibility. So our rule is once contact is made, it belongs to the enrollment counselor. So that one's pretty easy because there's a definitive line in the sand. The tuition planner and enrollment counselor, that's where we see some risk, some overlap. So what we do there is we work very closely. We utilize the same CRM system for documentation so that the enrollment counselor and the tuition planner have visibility to how often the other one is calling or emailing, and that they can work as a team to reach out to the student. And we also have it set up so that the enrollment counselor is the primary point of contact, period, end of story, and that the tuition planner is a support service. So that kind of demarcation has helped to eliminate those kinds of challenges. But that's a really great question because there is risk there. So well thought out. Anything else for me, Emily, with questions?
Not so far. Does anybody have any other questions?
Okay. Wonderful. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to share this time with each of you. Thank you for taking time out of your lunch to come together and discuss these 5 keys. Please feel free to reach out to me via email. I will get back to you as promptly as possible. And I very much appreciate your time, so thank you very much.